I'm Dr. Cerf, I'm your iFit guide, and today we're on the High Line in New York. We're gonna walk together and talk about your emotions, how they work in our brain, how they interact, and how you can use them to not let them guide you, but actually guide them. So, emotions are interesting. They dawn on us. We feel like we have control over them, but actually our ability to navigate them is only limited. You know, for example, let's say that something bad happened. Say your mom is sick. It's not like you're saying, you know, mom is sick, I need to feel sad. Let's turn on sadness, feel sad for a while, okay, enough, let's turn off sadness, time to move on. Somehow, even though we control the story, the emotions happen to us. We don't really control them entirely. And today we're going to talk about why they're working like this, and how can we still exert some influence over our emotions. So, the thing that I should start with is saying that emotions are scattered over different places in our body, and they influence our thinking. For example, let's take a positive one, happiness. Many times, happiness isn't just happening to us naturally, it's also somehow influenced by our experience of the world around us. The classical example would be the following. If you take a pencil and put it in your mouth, like this, everything is going to be a little funnier. Why is that? Because your mouth already exhibits a little bit of the smile that your brain interprets as, okay, I guess that somehow it's funny, and everything will be a little funnier. If you want to be funny, just tell your friends to put a pencil in their mouth or tell a joke, everything's going to work out. In the same way, if we numb some emotions in the face, things are going to work differently. A very recent study in emotions shows that people who have Botox on their face actually feel things a bit different because their brain doesn't get the feedback from the face that tells it how to feel things. We just don't have the muscles movement that you need to understand. Now, important learning from that is that in fact there's an interaction between our face and our emotion. Faces for humans are critical. They're where we exhibit our emotions, they're where we display them to others, and that's how we read other people's emotions. That is why nature gave us many muscles that are scattered all over the face that tell the brain how we're feeling and tell the rest of the world what our brain is experiencing. Now, the interesting thing about those emotions in the face is that the muscles that control them aren't fully under our influence. Some parts of our face we can control, we can move, and others just happen to us. Here's what I mean by that. If you're laughing truly, if you're actually enjoying the moment, your face becomes a little bit different. There's a smile that emerges in your mouth. There are changes in the muscles next to your temples, and altogether your face exhibits the positivity of happiness. However, if you try to fake a smile, you might be able to actually move your mouth and make it feel like you're smiling, but you won't be able to move the muscles next to your temples, which are not under your control. Your brain controls them, but you don't. As in, you can tell if someone is faking a smile or actually smiling, not just by looking at the face, but also looking at muscles that they don't control. Our brain controls those, but we don't. And it's so powerful that colleagues of mine in San Francisco were able to actually decode a person's emotions fully, not by asking them what they feel, not by actually talking about the experience they have, but simply by looking at their face without sound and seeing how their muscles move. This is called facial coding. And facial coding is the ability of someone to look at your face and look at the movement of muscles in your display and tell what you're going through. Now, why is it interesting? It's interesting because it gives us a lens into how emotions work internally in ways that maybe even the person who experiences them doesn't know. Okay, so now comes the key moment where we have to understand, why do we have emotions? What are emotions for? And the simple answer is that emotions are nature's way of coding years of decision making in the past into a rapid, momentary choice. Here's what I mean by that. Imagine the following story. Back 100,000 years ago in the savannah, there was a monkey. and this monkey sat in the savannah and suddenly it saw on a tree, maybe 100 feet away, a banana. Delicious banana that it really wanted to eat. But it also saw that maybe 500 feet away, there's a lion. The monkey sits there and says, okay, I want to get the banana. It's 100 feet away, I can run and get it. But the lion might start running towards me, chase me, and maybe, well, it's going to be a fatal ending of my life if the lion gets there faster. What should I do? This monkey opened an Excel sheet, sat there and said, okay, the speed by which monkeys run, this fast. The distance to the tree, this much. The speed by which lions run, this much. The speed that, the distance that the lions have to catch me, this. Did all equations and realized that it's too risky. That running to the banana might actually be terminal for the monkey's life, and he just went away. A different monkey didn't do the equations correctly and actually went for the banana. This monkey didn't make it. The lion caught it, and well, we're the descendant of the monkey that did the right calculation and realized that it's gonna lose his life if it makes the wrong choice. Many, many monkeys did the same calculation and learned what is proper, what is not. And they encoded this information in their brain. And over years of evolution, the information became so kind of internal to the brain that monkeys are now born just knowing how to evaluate the distance to the banana, the speed of lions, and they just don't have to think about it. It immediately happens. These are emotions, and we call this particular one fear. The monkey today doesn't really sit there and calculate with Excel sheets what it should do. It just sees the lion, sees the banana, gets scared, walks away. Monkeys that don't have this experience, don't feel fear, are actually just going there, and well, they don't make it. So we're the descendants of those who had the right experience. And it's true for many, many feelings. Evolution first had some of our ancestors calculate them using complex decisions and then code them in their brain such that over the years we just feel them. This is why you go to a dark alley and you somehow feel uncomfortable going there, so you go different route. This is why darkness generally is scary to kids. This is why loud sounds startle us and we immediately look away to see what's going on there. This is why our brain comes equipped with a machinery that responds to things without us actually having to do the equation and the calculation and the choice. We just feel that something is not okay or perfect, and we do things differently. The one emotion that the high line, where we are, can help us understand is fear of heights. All of us, when we're born, somehow have a fear of heights without anyone telling us. You don't have to actually be on the top of a cliff and have someone tell you, you know, it's very high and you can fall and it's very dangerous. Even a baby, when it sees something that's far down, gets scared. Its heart rate is elevated, its pupils dilate, its respiration becomes a little faster. Somehow, the baby knows that it's risky to be on the top of a cliff. And this is because this baby is a descendant of many, many others who maybe tried the cliff and realized that it's risky and went away and learned to be afraid of that. Now here's the interesting thing. Emotions are coded in our brain, they operate fast, they give us clues on what to do, but they're not determining fully what we should do. We have different systems in our brain, the executive function in the front, that allows us to override those emotions. So you can feel scared when you're about to bungee jump, but still do it. You can still override them and do something. You can look down from the cliff and actually see the distance and say, you know what, I'm gonna do it. And over the years, we're creating this beautiful balance between how emotions work in our brain and tell us what to do, and how our brain learns to override them and create some kind of option for us that overrides the first early preemptive feeling that we have with some decisions that allow us to operate differently. So emotions aren't just a human thing. A lot of animals have emotions, they exhibit them in different ways. And in fact, if you look at the brain, the analogy that I like to look at is one of two fists put together. That's kind of the size of a brain in your head, actually. It's not as big as your skull. It's this side, those are the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere facing you, or the opposite if you're going this way. And if we look at the brain, try to understand it, it basically is the brain stem, the part that touches the spinal cord. It goes to the lower part of your fist, and that's the part where a lot of the basic feelings, basic experiences that your brain controls happen, like getting hungry, getting tired, breathing. All of those happen at the bottom. And then the thumb, the part that is under the fingers, is what they call the limbic system, the lizard brain. The part of the brain that actually is very old. It's something that we share with a lot of animals, and that is where a lot of the internal components of our brain that we can access but not control, like our emotions, reside. Our memories, our emotions, a lot of things we can have, reach, but not control over. And finally, at the top, there are the fingers, and those are the parts that are the cortex, the surface of our brain, things that we can control fully, like the decision to raise my arms or to speak to you guys. They sit there. So somewhere in between, where the thumb is, lies a system that we can experience but not control, like our emotions. And it turns out that this system is shared by a lot of animals out there. Monkeys, dogs, rats, they all have this part, and they all exhibit some signs of the behavior that we call emotions or feelings. For example, when we look at a little dog, when we come back home and it wags its tail and gets excited to see us, partially it's controlled by the system that makes the dog feel this burst of energy, this burst of love that is towards getting towards you. And again, for the dog as well, this outcome is years of decision making that were written into its brain that lead up to his experiencing something uncontrollably as an emotion. Now, the interesting things about those emotions is that we can learn to change them and control them. We can learn to take the part of the brain that is the top, the cortex, the decision-making part, the part that has more of the recent brain activity that was developed in the last 100,000 years, learn to override what's happening in the thumb and give you some kind of ability to do things that your emotions say you should be afraid of. Because as we know about life, sometimes you want to take risks. Sometimes you want to do things that are scary or that something tells us that we should be considering to avoid. That's how we learn. That's how we become more advanced. And so, in many ways, nature lets us interface between those two by connecting them directly in the brain. And I'll give you an example of how this happens right now. Some of you probably heard about virtual reality, VR. Goggles that you put on your head, and suddenly you find yourself in a different world that you've never seen before. You're part of an experience that wasn't there if you took the goggles off. Well, one of the classical virtual reality experiences is one where you find yourself at the top of a building looking down. You immediately see yourself at the top of a building looking down. Now it's very graphic. You know that it's not true, but still it's the case. And there's a little plank, kind of like this, and you're sitting at the top and you're being asked to make a leap and basically fall down from the building. A lot of us, when we do that, are getting scared. You put the goggles, you see yourself at the top of a building, you see this plank that you have to walk over and then jump, and everything in your body tells you to avoid it. Your heart is pumping, your pupils dilate, you start breathing faster. Everything in years of evolution tells you that doing this thing is going to be a mistake, because all your ancestors who did make this leap, who did make the step off the cliff, fell down and didn't make it. Yet you know, in the part of the brain that is under your control, that it's just virtual reality, that it's not true, that if you actually make this one step, everything's going to be okay. So despite part of your brain telling you not to, there's another part of you that says, don't worry, we can do it. And then you make the leap. You make this step, and nothing happens. You maybe see graphics of you falling down, but the reality is that nothing actually hurts you. And then two things happen. First, you make the move. You actually did it. You overcame one emotion with the executive function of your brain, and you did it. But more than that, your brain does an extra thing, which is it learns. It changes the connection between those two systems, and it says, you know what? I just now learned that maybe there's something I can do that I think I thought I could not do before, and as I did it, things didn't turn out bad. This little change is one weight in your brain that is now moving from, let's say, 0 to 0.1, a very, very small difference on a big scale. But it tells your brain something interesting. I tried something and it worked out, nothing bad happened. You do it again. You wear the goggles again, You find yourself at the top of the building and you make the leap. This time it's a bit easier because you already moved the weights a little bit to make it less scary. And it takes multiple iterations, multiple steps of you trying something and nothing happens, trying nothing happens, for your brain to unlearn years of evolution where you were told that being on a cliff is risky. And at the same time, you also learn that you can do things that you didn't think you can do. And this doesn't just work when it comes to, say, being on top of a cliff. It's true for pretty much every emotion. Having the power of the executive function in our brain to override them and teach us how to control them affords us the ability to choose when to let our emotions guide us and when to let the cognitive functions of our brain guide the emotions. In fact, in many ways, this is what therapy does. Therapy teaches you how to let your emotions manifest themselves, but also let a different part of your brain interact with them and decide when to let one or the other navigate you. So to explain that, we need to teach one component about our brain that tells us why therapy works, why we can actually talk about our feelings and change them. And the answer to that comes from a research at about 10 years old that explained to us that memories that are in our brain are not fixed. They can be changed. As in, even though the experience happened and we created a memory for it in our brain, we can still change how we remember it once it's there. Here's what I mean by that. Let's say right now you're listening to me, and what I'm saying is fascinating to you, so you create a memory in your brain and you store it, and you put it in your brain and it's there in the vault. And tomorrow a friend of yours asks you to tell them, what did you learn? Say, oh, I learned something interesting. So you pull the memory and you tell them the story. What happens at that moment is that the memory isn't just being shared and then put back in the vault as it was, but actually it's being exposed. When you talk about a memory, everything that happens at the moment can leak into it and change it. So when you're done talking about it, you're actually saving it, overwriting the original. So if someone comes to you in 2 weeks and asks you, what did you do today? And you load the memory, you won't load the original, you would load the last version that was used with small, slight modifications. And this is not a bug of the brain, the fact that memories change even though they're inside. It's a feature. It's what nature gave us that allows us to actually keep changing memories after we have them in our brain, especially if we don't like the memory as it is. It allows us to override it and change things. This is why we don't have trauma from every bad experience. You can have bad experience, have a memory for it, but as you relive it again and again, you also change it again and again and make it a little bit better. And the key thing is that this is why therapy works. This is why we can actually change emotions even if they're bad. And the tool is the memory and the talking about it. So, if you have some bad experience, some bad memory, and you want to change it, one way to do that is to actually load the memory from your brain, share it, reframe it by having different perspective, and then let your brain rewrite it. This is, for example, what happens when you go to a therapist. Therapist presumably asks you to tell them about your, say, bad breakup that you're feeling terrible about. And as you tell them about it, your brain loads the memory and shares it. And the therapist, if they're good, are going to help you by suggesting some way to reframe it or a different perspective of it. And they're going to actually leak information into the memory. And when they're done talking to you, you're going to override the original with the modified version. You're going to write over the original version a different, better experience. And then it's there. Next week, you go to the therapist again. They're going to ask you again to tell them the story. And now you're going to load the modified version, which is a little bit better. And then they're going to ask you again to tell it, and you're going to open it and expose it. And then they're going to intervene again and say something new, offering a different perspective, even better. And then you're going to resave it on top of the second version. And then again and again, you're going to do it again and again by talking to your friends, your family, your therapist, and people that are willing to listen to your story and help you reframe it. And over time, in doing that, you're going to actually change your experience. So the key message that I wanted you to understand from today's walk is that while emotions guide our behavior, why they're necessary, why they're there because of many, many years of decision making that allowed us and afford us a fast and rapid understanding of the world that is even better than ours in many ways because it builds on what our ancestors tried, failed, learned from, and experienced, they are not written in stone. We can use the more novel, adaptive, and cognitive part of our brain to actually interface with our emotions change them, override that, and maybe get us different experiences. And the key thing is that language and stories are the way to do it. If you have a memory and you want it changed, if you have an emotion and you want it changed, using language to actually voice this, to tell a story, to actually interact with others who will give you different perspective is an easy way to change the memory, override it, and over time, because of the connection between the emotions and the executive functions, you will learn to have different experiences of your feelings that will allow you to choose at every given moment whether you want to trust your feelings fully or whether you want to override them and listen to something else. Now, as an interesting thought-provoking thing that I want to leave you with, I would say that of all the animals in nature, that many of them have different ways of experiencing emotions, humans have the most complex way to override emotions that I explained to you in many ways the way by which it works, but we still don't know if it's actually useful to rely on our cognitive functions more or on our emotions more. We think we can distinguish between what decisions came from our emotions, what came from our cognitive, executive, deliberate function. We think we can tell them apart. But the reality is that they're very much mixed. Many times, things that we thought were purely emotional, I got scared and I didn't do that, were actually a decision that we integrated cognitively after deliberation. You just didn't think about that. And sometimes it's the opposite. We think that we know exactly why we did what we did, but it turns out that our emotions guided us. In many ways, animals are much better than us in that. Animals, they are guided by feelings and by sensory experiences all the time. They cannot trust them. But we humans use this executive part of the brain, the new part that pretty much humans and some apes have, to tell a story all the time of why we wanted to do things the way we wanted to, not even knowing that it was actually guided by internal metrics of our brain. I'll give you an example. If I ask some of you why you chose your partner, you might say things like, he was really smart, she was funny, we really clicked on the first topics that we talked about because we share the same hobbies. You're going to come up with all kinds of answers. Rarely would you say, I have no idea. I just felt it and that's about it. We typically try to use the unique part of our brain that is kind of cognitive to come up with stories that help us tell why we did what we did in a way that explains our behavior, not just by feeling, but also by thinking. But there are more and more studies in neuroscience that show that a big part of our decisions are actually driven by things that we have no understanding of. They just happen to us fast in the emotional system, and we just respond to them and make up a story about them. For example, in the story that I told you about choosing partners, it turns out that the smell of your partner is as important as a lot of things that you don't really consider. And you never would say that. You never would say, oh, he really smelled the way my immune system thought would be perfectly aligned to create great offsprings. You would just say, he was great. You wouldn't know that. In a study by a colleague of mine, they brought people to the lab and they told them, you're gonna be part of a small study about how you behave in different situations. Please come, sit in this lobby, someone shakes your hands, give you some cup of water and tells you, we're gonna call you into the other room in a few minutes. People sit there in the lobby waiting for the experiment to start, but actually it already began because the experiment was entirely in the lobby, and all it was about was seeing what people do when they're waiting for the experiment to start. And specifically, the key moment was the moment after someone shakes your hand. As if you might thought about that, why do people shake hands? What's the point of that? What's behind this? Well, there are all kinds of theories. One says that it was a way for medieval knights to show that they don't have weapons because most of them were right-handed and they just wanted to show that they're not holding a weapon, so that's why they offered their right hand. But another theory that comes from this study is that actually we shake hands to mix the odors of our bodies onto each other so that we can actually smell them afterwards and see if we're a good match to each other in terms of immune system and compatibility genetically. In this particular study I mentioned to you, people whose hands were shaken while they were waiting in the lobby, within less than 5 minutes after the experimenter left the room, did something like this. They brought their hand and they got it close to their nose. They somehow smelt the mix of their hands with the experimenter hand. What's interesting is that they did it in a very controlled way. If the experimenter came and wore a glove while they shake your hands, no one did that because there's no mixture there. If you're a straight man and a woman shake your hand, you actually would do that. But if a man shakes your hand, you wouldn't do it. If you're a gay man, only when a man shakes your hand, you will do that. So in a way, we really do check how we are mated with the other person in terms of immune system and genetics. But the interesting things from the perspective of emotions is that if you ask people why you chose this thing, no one's going to ever tell you, it was a feeling that came to me and I have no explanation. We humans will always use the fingers, the cortex, the part of the brain that is more new and more complex and novel to invent a story. And in that sense, what I wanted to take from this journey that we had is that emotions are guiding some of the decisions, our cognitive executive functions the rest, and together they make you who you are. And if you're a slave to only one of them, and you tell every story as if you're just a conscious, rational decision maker, you will miss some key parts of how your brain works. Because your brain needs the two systems to work in concert to give you what you actually want. And in a future video, we're going to talk about how decisions in our brain operate by merging those pieces of information and giving you a way to really understand what you want and how to get it by perfectly aligning those two systems together. So here we are, ending our journey on the High Line. I was Dr. Moran Cerf, your iFit guide, and today we learned about emotions, how they work in our brain, how they interact, and how you can use them to not let them guide you, but actually guide them. Thank you so much. Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Moran Cerf, I'm your iFit guide, and we're by the Hudson River in New York City. We're gonna walk and talk about perception and our brain. Let's start.